Welcome to Project Vanguard Podcast, home of the community of veterans in energy. We believe energy security is national security, and our mission is to double the number of veterans working in the energy industry. I'm your host, Kevin Doffing. Today's guest is Jim Adams, a Coast Guard veteran and the president of North American Operations for Natural Power, an independent engineering firm working across utility-scale wind, solar, and energy storage. Jim went from search and rescue and maritime law enforcement on the St. Louis Seaway to spotting a Vermont wind farm and pivoting his entire career into renewable energy. He built Natural Power's U.S. presence from scratch and now sits at the intersection of engineering, policy uncertainty, and national security. We talk about growing a renewables energy business, the real work behind business development, and why veterans' discipline, communication skills, and calm under pressure mindset are exactly what this sector needs. Finally, we dig into depolarizing renewables, American energy independence, and why Jim believes veterans are uniquely positioned to lead this transition, as well as his advocacy for veteran activities in fly fishing. If this resonates, share it with another veteran and join the Project Vanguard community at our website, projectvanguard.com. This is where your next mission starts. Let's get into it. Jim, thanks for making time today. I know you're a busy man. How's it going?
My pleasure. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. It's going okay. Very busy time for my business, and life in general is very busy and hectic at the moment. But happy to be here.
Yeah, I mean, you just came out of the field coming out there with Rivers for Recovery, right?
Yeah, had a nice little break a few weeks ago. I was up in the Northern Adirondack Mountains supporting a veterans group called Rivers of Recovery, which basically takes largely combat vets, but almost anyone that has military service out and takes them fly fishing or hunting and spends a few days trying to, build camaraderie and, help teach people new skills and enjoy being outside.
That's awesome. How are they funded? I know in Texas, they've started to fund more of those projects with like the Texas Veterans Commission has some programs around things like that, but I haven't seen that as common.
Sure. Yeah. My understanding, there's a variety of ways in which they're funded. So individual donations, some VA funds, things like that. And so I'm not entirely sure about, all of the funding and where it all comes from. But there's another group that I've also volunteered for as well. It's PD Abate, which is another organization based out in Montana. And they're funded largely by donors, individual donors and the like as well. So, and they do a very similar thing.
Nice. Well, we'll make sure to get those links in here so anybody interested in learning more, participating, or supporting can be able to do that.
Excellent.
How did you get connected with them?
Good question. So I've been a fly fishing guide dating back to 2020. I've been a fly fisherman since I was about 4 years old. And during the pandemic, I was looking for something that got me out of the house a little bit more, as opposed to just being inside and on Zoom calls all the time. And so I got my fly fishing guide license through the state of New York and started working, just on weekends up with the Hungry Trout Fly Shop up in the Adirondacks of New York. And, back then there weren't all the conflicts in terms of school sports and all these things. So I could spend a lot of time out in the river doing that and really kind of building that experience. And one of the fellow guides up there is an Army veteran. And he basically has been doing these sorts of volunteer trips for a number of years. And so there aren't too many of us out there that are veteran fly fisher guides. And so he pulled me in, asked if I wanted to help out. And of course, always willing to do something like that. So,
No, that's fantastic. I always find it really interesting that most of the vets I know that work in any industry are also doing some kind of, nonprofit service on the side, like
yeah.
at a significantly higher rate than what I've seen on the civilian side with business owners and things like that. It always shocked me when I meet another business owner that wasn't on a board of a local nonprofit. I'm like, what do you do with your time? They're like, I make more money. I'm like, that's great. That's great, but not why we're here. So go back to your day job. What would you say you do here when you're not taking people out for fly fishing?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've had the fortunate experience of building a business in North America in renewable energy. And so I run a business, the North American operations for a consultancy by the name of Natural Power. We're an independent engineering firm. We've got about 50 people spread between 3 offices between Saratoga Springs, New York, Golden, Colorado, and Seattle, Washington. And we focus exclusively on utility scale, renewable energy projects. So wind, solar, and storage as well.
Nice. And how did you get started in that?
Well, so it actually predates my time with natural power. I worked with another firm by the name of AWS Scientific. And so when I joined the military out of high school and did, a variety of, different activities or deployments, so to speak, and the like. And when I ended up in engineering school in Troy, New York, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, although I'm not a degreed engineer, but I went there. And I was still a reservist at the time, and I was essentially driving to a brewery festival with a friend of mine at the time, and going through southern Vermont, we saw a utility scale wind farm up on a ridge line, and I said, "That's it. I want to do that. That's what I want to focus my career in." And there was just something fascinating to me about the technology and the fact that the utilities were investing in it, and it seemed new and novel and different and fun.
Yeah.
And so I just focused all of my school activities and research projects into renewables at that time. And while I was still balancing being in the Coast Guard and going active duty in the summer during that same time period, which was, quite an interesting balance. But anyway, it just so happened that there was a firm not too far from my university that was focused in renewables. There weren't too many firms out in the US back then that were focused on these sorts of things. And I started as an engineer, even though, again, I'm not a degreed engineer, took a job as an engineer, grew with that company, stayed there about 7 years, and then found natural power and just said, this is an interesting challenge to me. I would be very interested in trying to build something from scratch. And yeah, so that's essentially how I found it.
You end up building out this business, and it's one of those things that I always find is really challenging for a lot of like business owners or people doing this entrepreneur thing, especially when they come out of the military, which is sales. I've seen people go back to get their MBA, but I've just seen the MBA programs predominantly just lacking, right? They think that like you make something and everybody is of course going to buy it, and then it's making the beans and then counting the beans, right? It's ops and accounting, and they never get that third leg of the business school, sales. And that's always like, whether it was business plan competitions I was judging or anything like that, it's always the weakest part of the business plan. Did you face that, post-military coming in, having an engineer, like, advanced degree is just, you're so smart, right? Even if you're just playing engineer, like you're surrounded by that. Did you have any of that challenge around the BD and the sales coming in?
Absolutely. I mean, my focus is actually where I've excelled the most is in BD, but it's not because it comes naturally. To be honest, I'm very much more of a natural introvert. And so I have to try really hard to go up to that person at the conference and introduce myself and explain who I am without trying to be annoying or being overly salesy. But, over time, I've been able to kind of conquer that and get over that and just, being human about it and realizing that, everybody's in the same boat and understanding the importance of that. If you can't get that right, then a lot of other things are a problem in life. Networking is really, really important. And I think that's something that, a lot of folks don't value. And it's not necessarily something that you do in the military very often, particularly as an enlisted member.
Yeah. So go back to that. So how did you figure that out? Like we've started putting out videos on how to network because it's such a critical component. I feel like we're always talking about as we talk to veterans that are getting into any industry, especially this one that doesn't have like, a century of well-worn paths to step into, right? Like any new industry, you've got to really get out of your shell and go meet some people. How did you initially make those first steps into learning how to do that?
Yeah. Well, to be honest, it was very similar to parts of my time in the military, right? Like, you think to when you go to boot camp very first day, right? You're just thrown in a bus with the 40 other people. You don't know anybody, right? And then you have this shared experience. And then out of that, you develop some of the best friends you'll have. Sometimes they'll carry with you for the rest of your life, right? And so in the private sector, it's a little bit different because you're not being forced to do that. Nobody really has a choice to like, get together as a team in the military. You kind of either do or you're not going to cut it, right? In the private sector, it's different. But once I, started realizing when I was doing project related work that the people external to my firm, we're all trying to do the same thing, right? We're trying to put either megawatts in the ground or what have you. And those people, the first few people that I was working with most closely, they had other contacts that they were working with that had other projects and it was about meeting people, going to an event locally and seeing somebody that I've been working with on a project for a while. And I've got something to talk to them about, that shared experience, right? And then they were like, hey, I want you to meet so-and-so over here. They do something similar with this other organization. And You guys should talk, right? And it's about that sort of stuff. And then there's a common thread. You both know the same people, you're both working in the same industry, or you both have the same passion, right? And then you find out somebody happened to be in the military, and then there's immediately something to talk
Yeah.
about, right? And like, where were you stationed? How long were you in? All those sorts of things, right? So it's not as hard as people make it out to be. It's just, you have to take that first step, and you have to be willing to put yourself out there.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people networking gets a bad rap because people have been burned by it, by people who take it as a transaction. It's a win-lose game. But once hey, I want to hang out with people that I like and do work with people I like and have win-win solutions, it's not so bad. Like if you describe that, people are like, "Oh, that's not networking." I'm like, "Well, it's what networking should be. It's more of like a
Sure.
servant leader networking, right? What can I do for you?"
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I will say, like, just looking at the military and the energy industry, there are a lot of similarities. Like, there are a lot of folks that are very like-minded. They're very, they're all in it for whatever reason they're in it for, but there's a lot of similarities in that sense, right? And I found that in every technology, it doesn't have to even be renewables, right? I've seen it elsewhere in the gas industry and the like, and folks that are just, they're working towards a common purpose and trying to, build a project, so on and so forth. So,
Yeah, I mean, the industry is very tangible. It's execution focused, which means operations, logistics, safety, which are kind of bread and butter for any branch of service in the military. But you were in the Coast Guard, which
correct.
is not that common. So, can you talk a little bit about how did you decide the Coast Guard? Like, I never even thought about joining the Coast Guard, just didn't come up on my radar. My dad was in the Army, so I probably over-indexed on that more than I wanna admit. Definitely more than I would have admitted at the time. "No, I'm not doing this because my dad was in the military. I'm just gonna go do the exact same thing he did, but 40 years later."
Yeah.
How'd you even learn about the Coast Guard?
Well, it was certainly from my parents when I was younger, and we would go on vacation up to southern Maine in the summertime, and occasionally out to Boston as well, and we would see the Coast Guard doing various things. Usually we would see the Whitehulls out doing patrols and going on search and rescue related missions, mostly training, I would assume. Now, knowing what I know, but it was fascinating to me. Their mission was fascinating to me. The other thing that was inspiring was the fact that my father used to tell me it was really hard to get into the Coast Guard. They didn't just accept anybody.
Oh,
And so,
challenge.
I was kind of like, yeah, all right, that sounds good. And I openly admit I wasn't the best high school student. I wasn't highly focused. And, so being able to do something that wasn't easy sounded kind of fun after I got out of high
Mhm.
school. And yeah, the other branches, I mean, I certainly respect them all. They all have their purpose, and they're doing great work. And I think we owe a lot of gratitude to everybody in every branch, but it just never really even occurred to me to look at other branches outside of the Coast Guard. It was just such an obvious fit for what I was interested in doing.
No, that's great. So, when you were in, kinda walk me through what you ended up doing while you were in.
Sure. Yeah, well, there was a variety of stations that I was at. My MOS was boatswain mate, basically. And so when I joined, I wasn't entirely sure, what direction I really wanted to head. As you know, there's so many options. There's so many things you could do. You could go on the aviation track. You could go on, the fireman track and be more on the engineering side. Let's say engineering, I'm, speaking to like dealing with engines and propulsion and things like that, below the deck. But the idea of being a boatswain mate really inspired me. Being in charge of a small boat crew, going out doing search and rescue, going out doing law enforcement related
Mhm.
missions, that was really interesting to me. There were roles in large cutters, there were roles in small boats, there were roles in aids to navigation. All of those things were really exciting. So I went to Cape May for boot camp back in '96, ended up leaving there, went to A school. I decided that I wanted to end up becoming a boatswain mate, obviously, and went to A school for that, and then immediately was stationed in New York Harbor, Station New York. I was there for a while, and then had an opportunity to transfer up to an aids to navigation team in Saugerties, New York, which is a little bit closer to where I grew up. That was fine. I really wasn't a fan of doing aids to navigation. It was kind of boring. Everybody that was there, they were like, this is the best job in the Coast Guard. And they're right. It's a great job. But if you've done a lot of other things first, it's a great job. When you're 18 and you're just like, I want to go out and save people, and I want to go do these things and, chase drug runners or whatever,
Yeah.
aids to navigation may not be the place where you're going to do that, right? Anyway, after that, so I transferred from there. I was in Boston for a bit, but where I spent the majority of my time, and especially the last 4 years where I was essentially a full-time reservist, I was up in Alexandria Bay, New York. So on the St. Lawrence Seaway, near Watertown, basically, and on the Canadian border. And so, and that mission was exclusively search and rescue and law enforcement, maritime law enforcement. And so when I was up there, I was a small boat coxswain and, doing a variety of different jobs, but a lot of law enforcement, a lot of search and rescue. In the summertime, in the wintertime, it was kind of boring. I didn't really go up too often in the winter. I was largely a reservist when I was there. And I say largely in that the Coast Guard at the time had an opportunity to go full-time in the summer through Operation Summer Stock. And so I fortunately had a really nice, high-paying, relatively speaking, job that had a lot of responsibility and was very enjoyable in the summers working up there full-time. So,
Man, that's awesome. When I first was learning about what the Coast Guard actually does versus what we make fun of it for doing, which is a pretty wide gulf, right?
absolutely.
Also, the Coast Guard are like the best sports about like letting people just talk smack about your branch, knowing that like, yeah, well, we actually save people. We don't sit on a boat that's the size of a city and then like come home and like, complain about the chow. It's pretty impressive.
It is fair enough. I mean, you kind of have to have a thick skin, the whole baby Navy thing and like, puddle pirates and all the slang against the Coast Guard, you just let it roll off your back. It's not a big deal.
I've never met an angry Coast Guard vet that's like got a axe to grind because of that. Like not once.
Yeah.
I've met a lot of Marines that have that axe, but they deserve to have that axe grinded on them.
For sure. Yeah. And I don't know, if you don't have a little bit of angst as a Marine, then you shouldn't be a Marine, right? Like, I think
Yeah.
that's par for the course.
Yeah. And before I start getting yelled at, I have to admit I was in the Army. People join the Army largely for college benefits. People join the Marines to be Marines, and I will always be jealous of that esprit de corps. And that's all I'll ever say about that again.
Yep. Fair enough.
So what made you decide to get out of the military?
Well, there wasn't any one particular thing. I had found someone that I fell in love with and wanted to have a family, and I also found a passion in renewable energy. And there really wasn't any way that I could stay in the military and keep doing what I'm doing. In terms of like, I certainly couldn't do it in the military in the same way, right? Like boats and mates don't go and put wind turbines up or install solar panels and stuff like that, right?
Right.
So the decision to leave the reserves back in 2004 wasn't easy. I had for a long time anticipated on just being a reservist or retiring as a reserve, right? After 9/11 and after Iraq, there were a number of activations that happened that were highly disruptive. I mean, that's what I signed up to do. So, I'm not complaining. But when you've made a decision to pursue a path in the private sector, and then all of a sudden you're told, the very early days of your career, and you feel like you have a real opportunity ahead of you, and then you have to put it on pause, it was a challenging thing that I had to navigate, right? And certainly there are protections in place, like I wasn't going to lose my job and all that sort of stuff, but it just, it was clear to me that what I wanted to do at that moment wasn't necessarily conducive to staying in the reserves at that time. So it was really, my career, it was a logical thing that I had to do. I had to step away from it to be able to do what I'm doing today at that moment. So
Nice. So, when you look back, what would you do differently about your transition? Was there anything that, you just found like I made a big misstep in this way and I would do it differently in another? Or
well, I probably would have gone through those first few years of my career and then gone back and tried to get back in the reserves if I could when I was of the age. Because it got to a point where it was like, well, I really miss doing all these things. You're like, I miss the mission, I miss the camaraderie, and it has nothing to do with the money or the retirement or the benefits. It's just the mission of the Coast Guard was really meaningful to me. So I do regret that, but understanding, I had to make that call at that time. So other than that, the transition, there wasn't, other than what we kind of talked about before in terms of networking and putting myself out there and like, realizing that at the risk of sounding somewhat arrogant, people in the military, I think, undervalue what they can bring to an organization, right?
Yeah.
That discipline, that military bearing, all of those sorts of things aren't intrinsic in everyone, right? And it's not to say that there aren't great people that didn't go in the military that have those qualities and possess those qualities. That's not it at all. But I think people under leverage that, and I was certainly one in retrospect. I probably did not, lean as heavily as I could have on some of those great less tangible skills that, you get just having been in an organization like the Coast Guard or Army and what have you.
Yeah, I see that a lot where I think once you've been out for a while, there's two things that kind of occur to you. One, this is a pay to play life now in corporate America. There's not the shared responsibility, brother's keeper kind of mentality that you get in the military and just that common cause. There's a profit motive, and that's great. It's what we signed up for, but it's not the same. So you end up, having that nostalgia, having that lack of camaraderie to a certain extent. I've worked in, veteran crew transition for a long time. It's like the first 90 days, if we're successful, we get you a job and you're kind of plugging in because you're coming out of the military. But once you get that job, you kind of get heads down. 3 years later, you pop up and you're like, man, I really miss those types of friendships. And that's where Project Vanguard, sometimes we help people get jobs, and then we just, they're like, "I'll volunteer forever." I'm like, "Okay, sure, buddy." Like, it's like my kid being tired at bedtime. "Yeah, man, we'll get ice cream and watch a movie when we get home. It's 10:30.
Yeah,
Asleep before we even, crack the door, getting out of the car, and that's fine, right?
sure. Yep.
They're gonna be back at it. But then just not seeing the value of those soft skills because 'cause you've been surrounded by it,
Yep.
right? It's
Hmm.
kind of like, what is it? The old fish talking to the young fish, and they go, "Man, the water's nice today," and swims off, and the young fish goes, "What's water?" Right? When
Sure.
you're immersed in it, you
You
just
just
don't
know.
know
You
it's
don't
there.
know. Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, absolutely the case. Absolutely. So, yeah. So, I mean, that's a key thing. I think the other item, that perhaps in hindsight, I used to say, you can't, running a business in the private sector is different than running whatever a boat crew in the Coast Guard, right? And thinking about it from the perspective about how you deal with an employee and the like, and the fundamentals are actually the same. Treating people with respects and being clear in your communication, giving them direction, things like that. And I think as professionals, a lot of us, I still struggle with those things on a day to day now, but I had this perspective that I couldn't do that because in the military, you tell somebody just do it, and like being a senior NCO or whatever, they're gonna do it.
Mhm.
You have to approach it differently in the private sector, which, it is true for sure. It is different, but fundamentally, it's not all that different. And I think that's something that over 20 years out of the military, I kind of look at now and I'm like, I can probably handle this a little bit more like I used to if it might be to my benefit rather
Right.
than being overly prescriptive or
Yeah.
over using too much the soft skills. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, but then there's also, E4 Mafia and everything else in the military. They know how to, tell you no without telling you no.
yeah,
And I
sure.
was a
Yep.
second lieutenant, so I was a dumb officer, technically in charge, but operationally, a little subservient to the senior NCO that, is basically my keeper, my coach. And I remember I was out at a dinner in our industry with a boss, and then one of our clients was a former E6. And we were talking, and my boss was like, "Oh, it'd be great to be in the military where everyone does whatever you say all the time." And we both been over laughing, dying. And we're like, it's not
Yeah.
like there is that, but, they can also politely tell you to go F yourself by "Oh, yeah, hey, roger that, sir. I'm gonna go do the thing that you're making me stop, which is gonna get you in trouble, and sure, I will do that without telling you that you're about to get in trouble because you told me to go do something I shouldn't or should wait till later." There's so many ways. It's almost like watching Downton Abbey, "Oh, I can say yes, but do no at the same time."
Sure. Yeah. Yep. No, that's a fair point. That's absolutely a thing.
Well, but when you were enlisted, I think that the structure is a lot more present than second lieutenant coming in. It's like you're in charge, but not really in charge. Let's wait till you're a captain, and then we'll actually trust and
Actually listen
respect
to
you.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, for sure. No, I get it. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely. So, I think a lot of it also comes down to when you're having those discussions, right? Like if you're actually out on a mission and you say, "Hey, go do this thing," people need to do the thing, right? That's the whole
yeah,
point, right? And not to say that you can't be challenged, but it's different than when you're back in the station and it's just a regular Tuesday afternoon and people are screwing off and you tell somebody to go do something and they don't do it. It's just there's a different level. There's an order of magnitude difference. Nobody's really gonna die if I tell someone that I want them to send an Excel sheet to so and so and they choose to sit on it for a week and they don't do it. It's probably not that big a deal, right? But
right.
if it's like, hey, you got gear drift below deck right now and we're taking on water, that's a problem if you don't get the pump out and get rid of the gear. You know what I mean? Like that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. There's a
consequences are
different
totally different.
consequence.
Yeah.
Stakes get a little different.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, so go back to the camaraderie stuff. So, I mean, when we first got connected, we started talking about what Project Vanguard was doing to kind of bring that camaraderie back to this industry for veterans that are in it. 10% of the workforce are vets. It wasn't a hard sell to, I don't want to say trick, let's say convince you to be on our advisory board, which thank you. What do you see the opportunity for this community to do inside this industry? Like, what was appealing to you that you're like, yeah, I'm a busy guy. I have all these things happening, family, work, nonprofit. Why would I make some time for this?
Well, that's an excellent question. And to be honest, I think there is a political motivation here. I'm not looking to talk politics, but I think everything that we've seen. So when I started in renewables, it was never a partisan issue. And it was
Mhm.
very much about the energy industry and, working for people that were building gas plants or doing whatever. That were also on renewables, right? And it's just, the last, several years, there just seems to be a growing divide with certain folks in terms of how they view certain types of energy. And I don't think that's appropriate. And when I look at it from the perspective that, veterans accounting for 10% of our industry, I would love to see that be even more. You have folks, there is from those that maybe not always a fan of renewables, there's always a mutual thing that we can get behind, which is supporting veterans. Right. And
Mhm.
so, look, this is creating opportunities for everybody, for veterans, for people that really are looking for that camaraderie. They're looking for good jobs that are reliable, that are going to last for a long time. I know as an employer that I absolutely love if we have an opportunity to hire a veteran. Like, it's great. It's fantastic. There's a lot of things that veterans bring to the table that other people maybe don't have that same experience, right? And so, so it's a variety of things. There's not any one particular
Yeah.
thing when we started talking, but it is definitely like hey, folks, like this is good for our country. This is good for energy security. This is good for our grid reliability. We don't need to be polarizing
Right.
the energy industry the way we are. And if we can all get behind veterans,
Yeah.
and then maybe we can all get behind veterans in the energy industry and realize this is beneficial for everyone for all the right reasons. So
I mean, Friday I was at this event in Louisiana. So we're in New Orleans, flew in to moderate this panel on manufacturing in the state. And we got to meet with President of the Senate there in Louisiana. And I mean, he had so many great points that were just spot on. Like, listen, you guys have screwed up your messaging. If you're going to try and make this about you versus oil and gas, we're never going to pick you. I love oil and gas. I love the state, and sidebar, I owned an oil and gas company for 10 years, personally. I love oil and gas. But he went on to say how it's just a sales pitch. If your pitch isn't working, get a new pitch, get a new messenger, right? And I think that what veterans bring to this is we haven't really been leveraged as like a consistent voice, but we're such a huge part of this industry at 10% that you know, it's really easy to kind of get us out there and just talk about our experience, our military service, our industry experience, and it's just an easier sell. Someone's like, "Well, what kind of pushback do you get with veterans trying to sell, on renewable energy?" And I'm like, "I don't. That's not a problem, right? Once we're in the rooms,
sure.
like, we're good.
Yeah.
It's usually right of center, libertarian or pragmatic talking points, and it's more about just energy and infrastructure than it is, renewable or clean. And there is a renewable and clean argument to be made. That's not the argument we're making. We're just talking about building infrastructure and powering our country. And those are easy messages. When I'm in Louisiana or other places, those are not hard sells. That's like, you don't have to sell them on why. Now you're just going to talk about what and how.
Yep. All fair points. Absolutely. And I agree with that. I have spent many days on Capitol Hill over my career, and
Mhm.
I've met with people on both sides of the aisle. And I can say that those that may be in the news saying things that may not be to the benefit of the renewables industry don't say those same things when you talk to them one on one, but it is the messaging that's important. And it is what it is. There's little that we can do about it right at this very moment other than just keep, saying all the things, the positive things that the renewables energy industry basically can bring to the table and the benefits of having veterans in the industry and all of that. I think that's really the path forward.
Have you read that Abundance book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson?
It is on my list. I have a stack of books, to be
No,
honest.
I get
That's
it. I
quite.
I've wanted to read it since it came out. I probably have seen Ezra Klein on more interviews, but I just finished the book. And I mean, I think that you look at other things, on the politics thing, like the politics industry, which was written by Michael Porter, Porter 5. We've just got to get back to government getting things done. Like,
Yeah,
that's it.
sure.
There's a plurality of things that desperately need to be addressed and common sense, but minimal regulation that needs to be applied. So there's just rules of the game that business can follow, and we
Yep.
need to get moving. Yeah, I think that's where veterans are like, listen, we come from the largest bureaucracy in America. Like, you know, the Army, all branches of service are just this massive hulking bureaucracy that can get a lot of things done consistently,
Yeah.
but it is still a bureaucracy. But somehow when we focus on getting things done, despite what we could all go off on at length on
Yeah.
problems we've had in the military, it's still a wildly effective tool.
It's very true. And I think, what strikes me as ironic about all of it is that, so the government bureaucracy definitely, if you can navigate that, the private sector is easy in that sense. And if the government can get out of the way, we can get a lot of things done fairly quickly. Right.
Right.
And, I understand there's some richness in that, having, worked in renewables for the time that I have. There was a time where subsidies were definitely a factor in our industry, just like they are and continue to be in oil and gas as well. But, I think everybody is ready to turn the page and just show what we can do, and it's really
Yeah.
about government kind of getting out of the way.
I mean, like, I would have liked to have seen a slower ramp down on the subsidies, for renewables. I would have liked them not to be the financing vehicle in the IRA, honestly. It was the easiest, most efficient political mechanism. I would have preferred an accelerated depreciation schedule, like just across
Mhm.
industries, or extend what oil and gas already had on that front. But we are where we are. I don't like the extended subsidies for oil and gas. I mean, we're socializing the cost of energy,
Sure.
which makes sense, right? But subsidies aren't the way to do it because I think it distorts the market. But we're now outside of that. Like, there's no going back on that now. Like, that's done.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, you got an industry that's been around for, 3 decades. If you, not necessarily solar, but if you think about wind and,
Right.
you think about the PTC from the early days, right? And like it's, for better or worse, it's not, I wouldn't say that, the production tax credit didn't have its faults and that there aren't market distorting elements that come from incentivizing renewables the way they have. I mean, you could argue perhaps more significantly that it's, local like RPS requirements that are creating a bigger subsidy than PTCs and stuff like that. It depends on the market, right? Of course.
Right.
I think the bigger thing here, maybe looking at it in a little bit more positive of a note in the renewables industry, and I think veterans are a big part of being able to help navigate this. We know uncertainty. We know how to navigate turbulence. We know how to look at the storm and weather it well and just say, okay, we're going to take what comes. We're going to deal with it. There's no sense in like running around like your, hair's on fire. I realize two bald guys talking. It's about hair. It's not the right thing. But, it's like we've been there, done that. Right. And so when we were facing the, One Big Beautiful Bill Act this past summer, the one thing that I was consistent with my team about was like, look, we've been around a long time. The senior folks in natural power, we've all been around the block. We've been through PTC phase downs. We've been in time periods where there's no vision about anything in the future, right? We may not have anything and we're going to have to figure out how to get this done without any sort of government support. Everybody was fine with it. We figured out we would get through it. We've, Natural Power US has been around for 16 years. We've been through the phases, right? So that's one thing about this industry that's impressive to me is that we are resilient. And, when there's a curveball thrown, we're going to adapt to it. And I do think veterans play a big role in that as well, right? Because as you know, being in the military, things don't go as planned and you have to adapt, right? So,
Yeah. No plan survives first contact.
yeah, exactly.
And I think that the subsidies do, I don't want to come down negative on subsidies. I think they do have a great time and place. And the government should be fostering new markets, new technologies. Like, that's their role because that exists on a multi-year, multi-decade, timeline, and they need to foster and maintain the tax base, whereas private capital doesn't have that same kind of return horizon, right? Even venture, is not looking multi-decade.
No, absolutely. And if you look at it purely from a national security perspective, it is absolutely in our interest to be incentivizing new technologies, to be on the cutting edge, right? I mean, the number of things that over the years that we've perhaps given to foreign governments that we've done the initial investment in, it's non-trivial, right? And
Right.
it's due to a lack of political vision and polarizing things that don't need to be polarized, right? And so that's one thing I think as a nation we need to be doing better, right? Like we have a lot of brilliant people in this country. We're very innovative, and the government has a big role to play in a lot of that sort of stuff. But it needs to also know when to get out of the way, but then also maybe
Right.
not to just hand things off to other folks that we've invested a lot of time and energy in building, right?
Yeah, we gotta not just invent it, we gotta build it, scale it,
Yeah, own it,
own it.
keep it here and don't let it go overseas in that sense. We keep talking about America first and American jobs, all that sort of stuff. That's great, right? We've had the opportunity to do more, say, in the US in terms of solar manufacturing over the last decade, right? We've only started doing that in earnest more recently. There's really not I shouldn't say there's not a good reason. There's obviously a very good economic reason for why we've done things the way we've done them, but it's not necessarily in our interest as we're seeing now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to one of the guys from First Solar on the panel I had, and I mean, they were just talking about, like, we're opening this plant, and that's gonna produce 10% of demand capacity for solar in the US. Oh, and then we're gonna open up this other one, and it's gonna do 10%. I'm like, "Wait, so, like, you're gonna have 30 to 40%, like, demand capacity manufacturing, 100% US supply chain?" He's like, "Yep." I'm like, we need to talk about that more. And I think that going
Sure.
back to the
Yeah.
veteran thing, while we're a good messenger, we're also the people who can best sell the message of national security that you were just saying, right? It's always been there. It just hasn't been like received because of who or how it was being talked about.
Exactly. And it's also not been consistently focused upon, right? To me, it's a message that you have various folks, active military individuals, right, talking about how this is important from a national security perspective. Over reliance on foreign energy sources, oil, gas, what
Mhm.
have you, is not in our interest, right? And just even talking about folks that are basically operating bases in other parts of the world that are remote locations, right? And the benefit of having, more secure power just from distributed sources, things like that. It's those messages haven't consistent. They're just not consistent, right? You hear about it for a bit and then there's a change in the guard and then there's new people that don't really dwell on it and it's just the political football. So it's unfortunate because the reality of the situation doesn't change, right? It is in our interest. It will continue to remain to be in our interest. And it's a great industry for all the reasons, jobs, security, you have it.
Yeah. Well, and as we talk about messaging, you've done a really good job with this. I know I was just hearing your company's name today when I was listening to Open Circuit. How did that come? And I'm just a huge fan, and anybody who's listening to this and has no idea what I'm talking about, Jigger Shaw, Stephen Lacey, Catherine Hamilton are the original Energy Gang crew that was the original, decade-long podcast for anybody that wanted to get in and learn about it. That's where I got directed when I'm like, "I wanna get in this industry. I don't know what that means." And they were like, "Just go listen to this." And I would sometimes listen to an episode twice while I'm mowing my yard because 'cause I'm like, "I don't understand half the words they're saying. Let me listen to that again."
Yeah.
But y'all are now sponsoring it.
We are, and it's our privilege to do so. So that came about. We are always looking for new ways to kind of just raise our profile and get our name out there, right? And
Mhm.
it's not, we're not looking necessarily for new sales or anything like that. There are a lot of folks in the industry that rely on the reports that we generate for the projects that we work on, and it's about name recognition, brand awareness, right? 101, right?
Mhm.
Marketing 101. And so I've known of that podcast since it was the Energy Gang years ago and this new open circuit thing. It's kind of a spinoff. And I was just so excited when they came out, when they started the new generation of it. And given everything that's happened in 2025, right? Politically, thinking about the IRA, all the repeal, I mean, everybody has been thirsty for knowledge and perspective. What's going to happen? What does this mean? What is the impact? How worried do we really need to be? And I think those three individuals on that podcast they're really dialed in, they're really clued in. And it was a no-brainer for me, to bring it back to the team here and say, hey, folks, if you haven't heard, listen to this. What do you think if we sponsor this podcast, right? They just seem like a
Mhm.
really tight group of individuals that really know their stuff. And yeah, and it's been wonderful. We've had a number of people that have said, "Hey, I heard about you," or "It was great that you're sponsoring this. Thank you for doing that. We love it." And they realize like our contribution keeps that going. All that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's been great. I don't know if we'll be able to do it forever, but it's been wonderful so far.
Yeah. And you told me before, I mean, y'all are doing a big hiring push. So has that helped you on the hires or, just the name rec? How's that gone for hiring?
Yeah, I think certainly with some of the positions people have heard of us and the like, I think the benefit is really more just getting the name recognition out there, right? So we do a lot of work with financing institutions, right? So the big entities out there, like your JP Morgans, Wells Fargo's, Morgan Stanley, those types of individual or those companies, right? Organizations. And so what happens a lot of times, there's such big organizations, people shift around internally, and you might be working with this one group or these individuals for a while, and then they've moved on, and so there's a new flock of people that come in, and so it's always, I don't know, getting your name out there in a different way. So I'm not
Yeah.
constantly having to go to New York City and, go up to the 55th floor of some building on 6th Avenue and say, hey, I'm Jim Adams. Nice to meet you. And let me tell you about this company that's been around 16 years. So
And I've been
it's
doing
that
work
kind of
with
thing.
you for the last 6, but it's our
Exactly.
first day
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, it was really funny. I won't go off on a huge tangent, but this past summer I was in a meeting with my head of commercial services, and we were meeting with a big bank in New York City. And the lead person that we coordinated the meeting from was just like, immediately was like, I don't know that I know you guys. Like, who are you and what do you do? And his right-hand person looked and said, well, they just issued Reliance to us. They just worked on these 3, solar and storage projects this past year, and so on and so forth. So it's that kind of thing, right? He's like, oh yeah, okay, yeah. He connected the dots, but you got to get your name out there. People need to know who you are. It's super important, especially with what we do.
Yeah, it's corporate networking, right? Like, just because you told them one time doesn't mean they're going to remember.
Exactly. It's a very passive way to do it. I'm okay with that because it can be exhausting and expensive to be flying all over the country all the time. So
Yeah. So, as we wrap up, what advice do you have for veterans that are looking to get into this industry or potentially even come to work for natural power?
yeah, I would say do it, in terms of look to work in the industry without a doubt, right? I think there are so many people that are coming out of the military that have all the fundamentals that an employer wants to see, and that would be beneficial, to a company and, in terms of the right attitude, organizational skills, discipline, all of these sorts of things, right? Like doing your timesheet on a weekly basis and not having to be hounded to get the admin related stuff done, right? So absolutely do it. In terms of folks interested in natural power, there'll be more positions that we'll be posting in the new year. We're taking a bit of a pause right now. We've hired a number of folks over the last couple of months. And so check out our website, naturalpower.com. Drop me a line on LinkedIn as well. And so if you're former military, we're definitely interested in talking to you. We've had some great folks join our team over the years that have cycled out of the military, both officer and enlisted, and always a pleasure to have them on the team.
That's awesome. Yeah. And for anybody listening, if you haven't already, you go to projectvanguard.com, you join, you'll get invited to our Slack community. You'll introduce yourself. The Marines will all huddle off, the Coasties, the Bubbleheads. But then there's a hashtag jobs channel in there where people are dropping jobs. And those are great ways for people who, it's not, hey, here's the careers page for natural power. Here's a specific job that I have, you know, insight in. And so I always tell people, like, we help a lot of people get jobs, but that's not the point. The point is for us to help you get that screening call so that when you apply, you meet another veteran that works at that company so you can learn what that company's like, what the culture's like, what that job is going to be like. And then they can go, if you're not an asshole, because there is always that checkbox you got to get because the bar goes up, not down. There's no charity here. Someone at a vet at a company can just go down to HR and be like, hey, this Jim Adams guy seems pretty good. I know he applied for something. You should give him a look. You're more than likely going to get a screening call. Now, what happens from there is up to you. But a lot of times we got good vets. They get good jobs.
Yep, that's true, Kevin. I want to go back to a point that you said there. I can't overstate the significance of taking the opportunity to network and actually learn what a company does, right? Just applying to a position on a website, the chances of success can be pretty low with that if you don't know people within the organization, or more significantly and importantly, you don't know how that organization fits in the industry and what they do, right? So I've had the privilege of being able to speak to a number of folks in Project Vanguard over the last 6 months that were interested in transitioning, understanding the energy industry. And the great thing was that some of the folks, although they may not be a great fit for natural power based on their interest, I feel like they left the call with a better understanding of the energy industry and were able to kind of point themselves in a different direction, right? Saying, oh yeah, I actually want to build a project. I really don't necessarily want to be writing reports and being a consultant as much as I want to build a project, right? And so leveraging the community for that. I mean, I know I'm open to those discussions, and I can only assume that many other members, former military members of Project Vanguard, would also be willing to entertain those discussions.
Yeah. How did that come about? Like, could you give me an example of one of those?
Sure. Yeah. The name will escape me because it's been a number of months, but, working with Steve Bravo here in the Albany, Saratoga region, right, our local Project Vanguard liaison, connected me with somebody that was interested in seeking a position in renewables. And he was working in gas at the present. He saw a couple positions at Natural Power, wasn't entirely sure what we did and how we fit into the world. And through about a half-hour long discussion, we kind of, determined that where his interests were in the industry would be probably better aligned in development than they would be in consultancy and independent engineering. And that's based on, both his experience in the military and the types of things that he did while he was active, as well as the things he's been doing more recently in gas and kind of where he wanted to head and also where he was based geographically within the country. Right. And so, it's just one of those things where I think, if that conversation hadn't happened and he just randomly applied, he would have been wasting his time. It would have been the right position for him and the right fit for him. And, it's an opportunity. I think it's a better way to kind of short circuit your path from, what you're doing today to where you want to be by leveraging the network and being willing to ask questions and not necessarily be looking for a job, but looking to get some advice and perspective, right?
When I do sales coaching, it's like, listen, if you ask for advice, you're more likely to get a sale. But if you ask for a sale, you're more likely to just get some advice. So, go in there humble and curious and ready to learn. And, you'll kind of end up at the solution you should be at, maybe not the one you initially thought you wanted.
Yeah. Excellent point.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for making time today. I know we've run out of time, but this has been fantastic and super helpful. Any final thoughts for everybody listening?
Well, I want to thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure, and I really support everything that you and Project Vanguard are doing. So keep up the great work. And folks, if you haven't, signed up for the Slack channel, definitely do that and reach out. The invitation is there to connect. And yeah, just again, appreciate you taking the time to having me on.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for tuning into the Project Vanguard podcast. If this episode sparked something for you, share it with someone who's ready to think differently, whether it's about an all-the-above energy approach, how energy security is national security, or the veteran workforce in our industry. If you believe what we're building, a quick review goes a long way. You can do that wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, keep up the fire.